everyone. 2.5 years ago, Remy Berthaud and I had the idea to create a conference dedicated to open source businesses. We're now preparing for the third edition of Open Source Founders Summit and started this video series to showcase the kinds of conversations between leadership and open source companies that happen at the event. If you would like to be part of the conversation, you should join us May 18th and 19th in Paris. Welcome, everyone. I'm Emily O'Meara, your host, and I am chatting with Nick and Vincent today. Thank you so much for joining us for one of the video podcasts in preparation for Open Source Founders Summit, which is an event in Paris for leadership in open source companies. Nick and Vincent, could we start off by having you each introduce yourself a little bit?
Here you go, Nick.
Okay, fine. So, hi, I'm Nick. I'm based in Belgium, so not too far from Paris. Very excited to go there. And for my entire life, I've been working for companies in the open source space. First within agencies, Drupal, but for the last 4 years, I'm working at GitLab. And there I'm a director of developer relations, more specifically responsible for the open source program, so like giving away licenses for open source projects, but also education. So how do you train junior engineers to understand the whole DevOps flow? But I think the more interesting part that we can talk about today is the business of open source. And I have a program about that as well, and it's called Co-Create. And this is where we basically try to teach our customers how to contribute to GitLab, the open source bit, and convince them that it's in their advantage from a business perspective to do so. So I'll stop there.
Okay,
Vincent?
and as for me, so I'm Vincent Picavet and I'm president at Auslandia. I live in France. Auslandia is based in Paris, but we are actually 100% remote, just like GitLab, I think. And I live in the Drôme Valley, so south of France. And I created Auslandia in 2009, so quite more than 15 years ago, and we focus on open source geospatial solutions. So I'm initially an applied mathematics engineer, so I'm an engineer, but nowadays I'm more into management, strategy, partnerships, and vision about what we do. And what we do is providing solutions for everyone needing software to be able to handle data which is geolocated, so which you can locate somewhere on Earth or even somewhere on outer space, maybe. So that's what we do. We develop and provide solutions for as open source software for geospatial industry.
So my first question to start us off is about how can an open source project be a growth motor for the company? Nick, I know you have some thoughts about this. So how is open source treated as a part of the growth flywheel for the company at GitLab?
Right. So it's called like a dual flywheel strategy. And you can also, if you Google it and you add GitLab to it, you probably get to the handbook page on all the details that you want to know about this. But the short version is that we believe that if you allow people to help innovate your product, whether they're then using it or future users, you add like a whole lot of fuel in that innovation engine. And you can go faster together. So we have a lot of engineers working for GitLab, and then a lot of open source contributors that help accelerate that roadmap together with us for the features that they care about. It sounds, I think, obvious for the audience that understands open source. I think it's less obvious for those that might not. In addition, and again, like I might be preaching to the choir, I might not be, I don't know. But the entire roadmap, issues, and epics is also fully public. So people can understand like what's happening, which merge requests are happening, who's reviewing what, who's responsible for what. Like that whole internal operation scheme is both documented in the handbook, but also available in the issue tracker as if it was an open source project, because it is an open source project. It's just a large company behind it. There's nothing different there.
What about for you, Vincent? How do you see open source as a growth motor?
Yeah, I think there are two aspects in it. First one is, as Nick said, transparency, which is a very specific characteristics of open source. And transparency means trust, and trust with your clients and the community at large is something which will eventually give you growth, because you cannot do business if you don't have any trust with your customers and with your partners. So that's a very important point, which is sometimes forgotten, but working in transparency is actually very important and gives growth. Then the other aspect is, of course, the mutualization of efforts, which is you don't recode the same software any number of time for the same use cases, and you can mutualize the funding, you can mutualize the users and the use cases, and focus on building the best product together with your clients, with your end users, and also with your competitors sometimes, because we, for example, are not an editor as GitLab could be. We are a core contributor for various software, but still having people inside the company developing and outside the company developing in the same direction. This gives you growth and strength for your own company to be able to propose adapted solutions and be efficient in the realization of operations as well.
If I can add to that, I think it's not just an opinion. I've been talking to professors at MIT that research this entire belief that you have, Vincent. Like, it's actually good for your business to do so, and everyone right now kind of understands like using open source is a benefit for businesses. Even that they researched, and they found that it gives you this 3.5 times more advantage than not using open source. Kind of makes sense because you take these libraries and you can go faster. But then there's another research that confirms what you said, Vincent, is that if you contribute to the software that you use, you're actually up to 2 times more productive compared to your competitor that uses the same open source software. So you don't have to be the publisher necessarily, even if it's just you using open source and then contributing back to it. It's similar to you buying a car. You tweak the engine versus someone that buys a car and doesn't tweak the engine. And that's not my opinion. There's a research paper, and I might also like talk about that in Paris on how to use these facts and those findings as like evidence-based decision making on why an open source business, or as a business contributing or using open source, is not just a feel-good decision. It's an actual business advantage.
And oh, go ahead,
to
Vincent.
react, another point is we can also see the open source ecosystem as a whole, and see the growth not only as growth from each single company in the ecosystem, but of the ecosystem globally speaking. And it's pretty funny. Probably you don't know that, Nick, but we are 100% distributed company, and we use the GitLab handbook a lot when building the way we work today. And we have a very efficient way of working, a very efficient organization today, which is based on remote work. And this is partly thanks to GitLab and the handbook, because they published it early back in the days, and we got inspired by that. And in our turn, we also published some information, documentation, communication about how we work. And for sure, it helped other companies to improve their own efficiency inside the open source ecosystem.
Yeah. It's a whole other topic, like an open source company, like your manual, like open source it. Like, what do you have to hide?
Yeah, exactly. So that's growth is for one company is important, but also for the ecosystem, and there are different levels on that aspect.
Mm-hmm. As an open source company, how do you leverage that information that that actually contributing back to the project that somebody is using? makes them more productive to get your customers to contribute back to your software?
So who are you asking?
You, Nick.
Yes. It's a good question, and it's a hard question. Like, how do you quantify that contributing to your product if your customer is paying for the product is to their advantage? Or like, what do we get as a company out of that? Um, so this is not necessarily like research based, but like qualitative facts that I'm happy to talk about. But how we approach this is that we then go like to that customer and we do a hackathon for a whole week, and we basically go crazy on the software together to build something the customer cares about. Um, One, it's kind of like an educational journey on how the product actually works. But two, there's a lot of happy faces at the end of that week, because like they gained a lot more understanding of what the product does, but also they really feel empowered, that they can actually solve the problems that they want to solve within their businesses with your product. They don't feel stuck in that, oh, I have to build this glue code and this whole integration around it to then also maintain myself. So that's a bit what they get out of it. From a business perspective, we assume it's hard to measure that it reduces churn, and it increases the upsell.
Yeah, as far as we have different kind of clients, and it's the message is different when we speak to public organization and to private companies. For public organizations, there are some studies, especially from the European Commission, saying if you invest €1 into open source, then the impact on society will be €4. So, and this ratio is pretty high, and they can understand that because it's easy to understand, and it's from a legitimate agency saying that. So that's a very good selling point. For private companies, it's pretty different because they always are frightened by what we do, what will my competitor do if they access the same software as we do. So usually there's a lot of discussions to reassure them. And what we do is we have a full set of services we provide, and training is part of the services we provide. And we like to do training first. And during the training, we also explain how to use the software, but also how to contribute and the benefits of contributing. And you have in private company, you can see two directions when they go towards open source. It's either bottom up or top bottom. And bottom up is usually the users, they get a knowledge to how open source works, and they're usually very passionate, and they want their organization to contribute, so they push forward their managers and decide to contribute or let them contribute to open source. And that's a very good strength, and usually we can find some champions among these users, power users, who will also have the arguments and talk to deciders, so that they can actually allow funded contributions. But we also see, and we see that more and more in large organizations, the top-bottom approach with very strategic engagement from the very top management level, either because they want to have some sovereignty over their IT system, or because they are persuaded by the economic aspect. So all the large companies now having some OSPO, open source program officer, for example, they have this strategic plan. And in this case, it's much easier to be able to work with operational when you have a signed paper saying open source is the way, just transform that to operations.
OSPOs are an interesting one. I see also there's different maturities within companies on OSPOs. Sometimes it starts with, we have to know what's happening with the how do you call it, like the dark corners of the company that like secretly contribute to open source. Sometimes OSPOs are created to kind of understand that. but then they start to go into that growth mechanism of, oh, how can we do better as a company and share information, and then even ultimately go into marketing material like, look, we're thought leaders
Mhm.
in the industry. But it's a whole journey. And then it's a good question, even if you have customers that you're looking to contribute to your product, you have to understand where they are in that journey, to really talk in their language and understand like how you can basically help them.
Mhm.
And that's something I learned the hard way, because I kind of assumed everyone was more or less in the same boat, but that wasn't true.
Yeah, true. And another thing with large organization is one of their main pain point is one team never talking to another team on the other side of the world, for example. And
Yeah.
there are a huge number of cases where we do business with part of a company and then the same business with another part of the company, but they don't talk to each other and they don't work together actually. And what we try to do is to say, okay, so let's do that the open source way. You're gonna work on the same software, and you're gonna organize yourself between teams through open source contribution, and that works very well. And so sometimes, on the best case scenario, we do that open source, but there is also the inner source way of doing things, which is taking the open source way of doing software and transforming that into internal organization. And this is something which is really great for large companies because their siloed organization is very bad for efficiency. And when you have a solution for them to break these silos and having people talk together, that's a large, very, very good improvement of the way they actually do business, and it's efficient as well, and it means more money or cost
Yeah.
efficiency. So that's something we also provide as a service and as a consulting agency sometimes, and then we do the work of working open source with their teams so that they gain efficiency. So that's a good selling point as well.
And even if you then kind of see there's still roadblocks, I highly suggest that you send those companies to the inner source commons organization, because it's kind of like practicing the same mechanisms of open source, but then like within the safety net of your own organization. And once they kind of understand that fundamental of like how do we even share information between teams, as you mentioned, with code or at least repositories or something like that, then at least they can go to the next step in that journey. So you still help them.
Yes, because even if not speaking about open source, but just producing software in a distributed
Yeah.
and very large organization, that's a very complex problem. And actually, the open source community solved that problem. Well, mostly. And thanks to people like our organization, like GitLab or Git system and habits, processes, and all the culture which is around it, it's actually a working production system, and some large organizations have the same needs for their production, but they don't have the very good production
Yeah.
system. So that's a solution to that problem.
Before we wrap up, as I mentioned before we started recording, one of the things that I had to think of for this event and for these podcasts is about how 95% of building a company that's open source or a software company that's not is the same, but there's 5%, give or take, that's different. What do you think is that 5%? Vincent, why don't we start with you?
Okay, so I think the most what I learned it the hard way, of course, but the most difficult part in running a company is HR, globally speaking. So, and human relationship are mostly the same between a proprietary company and an open source company. The main difference is the community, because you also deal with people who are outside of your organization and who may have a different culture, who are not under contract. So you cannot actually use the contract to have them do things. And that's something you have to deal with differently than with your own employees and the way you would work in a proprietary company. So I would say HR, globally speaking, has specificities with open source software, which is not necessarily easy to manage because you have to make it differently than a classic organization, a classic company. Maybe Nick?
Nick, do you want
Yeah.
to add anything?
Sure. Yeah, and GitLab once had a little bit of a course on their opinions on this topic. Like, why is it so different? But one thing that for me was a takeaway, and I will never forget, is that we have this kind of philosophy that we don't optimize for knowledge transfer, but for knowledge retrieval. And we kind of talked about that already with like a public handbook and all of the other kind of like philosophies of an open source project. You basically do everything in the open, and then you allow people to grab what they believe is interesting to them. There's no reason why you couldn't do that with a company, and I think GitLab tried to do that to the maximum extent that it can, and it really makes a big difference in velocity. Like you can go a lot faster. I think one other thing that makes it really different is because everything is like in a single front. So like that hierarchy is kind of gone. All the issues like within GitLab are open. It allows for equal contributions. Similarly to an open source project, everyone can go to an issue and add their opinion. Maybe the maintainer will not listen, but it doesn't mean that you cannot add value. It's the same reason like why in a company are certain meetings excluded from people that they don't believe have to be in the room. Why can you not listen in? What are you afraid of that your employees will hear? You're basically employ them to reach the same goals that you want. You're not fighting each other. So I think that's really a key difference between running a company with open source or open source philosophies versus the quote unquote the 95 other common denominators that I think you talked about.
Excellent. I think those are very good answers. We'll wrap up there. Thank you for joining me for this podcast. I will see you both May 18th, June, and 19th in Paris. Anyone who's listening should join us as well. And that's it. Thank you both.
Yeah.
You're
Bye.
welcome. It was a pleasure. Bye.